The presence of the Royal Knight Commander was towering over before Art's eyes. He looks up to the commander and notes that he must be Frey's superior and was looking strong. Pettis appears and questions the commander if he shouldn't be busy cleaning up after the city's wreckage. The commander replies that he had been dealing with the A-rank monsters that were frequently spawning within the imperial capital's vicinity, just as a knight reports to the commander that they had successfully evacuated all the citizens. Art attempts to introduce himself to Marcos the commander, but his words were cut short as Marcos tells him to stay out of this. His eyes were glowing bright green. He tells Art that it was the Royal Knight's territory now. Just as numerous Royal Knights appear beside Art, Marcos the commander tells his troops to go and annihilate the monsters. He then stood still and began chanting a spell. Pettis sees this and immediately covers his face with his arms, yelling at Marcos about whether he was seriously going to unleash that power here. He then yells at Art to stand his ground. Marcos slams his gigantic sword into the ground, causing a huge shockwave to erupt with him in the center. The shockwave destroys everything that stood in its path, just like Pain in Naruto Shippuden. A huge explosion could be seen in the skies as monsters were flung back. The powerful shockwave soon comes to a stop, revealing two huge circles that surround Marcos as he stood in the center. Pettis yells at him saying that it was dangerous and that if Marcos wanted to kill all of them. Marcos apologizes and states that since they were outnumbered, he had no choice but to weaken them a little with Quake. Hearing that Marcos used the Quake spell, Art thought about how the original Quake could only make your opponent's body quiver at most. The other Royal Knights could be seen fighting against the various monsters in the capital. Until a gigantic bear monster lunges toward which catches the Royal Knight off guard. A huge clash explosion is seen as the other Royal Knights watch. Smoke and dust were scattered everywhere until a gloved hand is seen in the smoke. Commander Marcos had rescued the young Royal Knight in time and had blocked the monster bear's attack with his arm. He grips onto the snout of the bear monster, before slamming it directly into the ground, causing a massive impact that even cracked the ground. His eyes were filled with an unwavering wave of determination and fierceness as he stares ahead. He walks slowly to a group of monsters filled with various types such as crows and bears as his body radiates a bright aura. With a single massive swing of his sword, he slices all the monsters in one move. A monster bear soon appears behind Marcos, but he had noticed it already by then. A clash of strengths caused an explosion of smoke and dust to form once again from where they stood. Art could only stare in wonder and thought that there was no doubt about it that among the people that he had met so far, the Commander Marcos's strength was in an entirely different league. As the smoke and dust dissipates, Marcos could be seen standing triumph over the monster bear that wanted to sneak attack him. Pettis appears and strokes his chin, telling Art that thoroughly and overwhelmingly until there is nothing left. That man is completely focused on annihilating the enemy before him. The reason the imperial capital has preserved its peace to this day is that ever since Marcos joined the Imperial Knights roughly 15 years ago, not a single invasion was made by other nations. Art listened to how Pettis spoke so highly about Marcos, knowing that that was not all, as Commander Marcos had also bought time by acting as bait so that the evacuees and his troops would be unharmed. Art shows a disappointed look, thinking about the possibilities he could have if he only had half as much courage as Commander Marcos. He thought about the what-ifs as he recalls the incident back at the ballroom dance. And that if he had Commander Marcos's courage, then he wouldn't have had to make her cry back then. The group stood in the center of the circles that Commander Marcos had made with his Quake spell as a bunch of monster crows slowly surrounds them. More monsters soon arrived in front of the group while baring their fangs at them. Commander Marcos waves his arm in front of his troops, telling them to step back as he would handle this himself. But the troops yell out at him, stating that he was bleeding due to the clashes with the monsters from before. But Commander Marcos brushes their concerns away while telling them that he was fine as he prepares his sword. Art then recalls Urk's words about how the Isfil household is an ally of the people and that she must protect his smile too. Art's eyes were soon filled with immense determination and courage. Streams of water soon start to flow from the manhole cover of the sewer below them. Art thinks about the fact that he was just a weak person that made Urk cry, but despite that, Urk had accepted him the way he was. Art was preparing to cast a powerful spell with water, as he had remembered the reason why he wanted to do the protecting too. He raises his arm high in the air wanting to protect Urk's smile. He casts a spell combination of Wash plus Enchant spells, Swell Oxidize Elasticity Lightweight, creating a spell called Misty Jail that had trapped all the monsters that surrounded the group into bubbles that float in the air. The troops were shocked to see that magic was being cast multiple times by Art and realized that he was an adept user. Art then holds his finger and snaps them, saying let him rip. The bubbles filled with monsters soon disappeared in an instant, leaving sparkles in the air. But Art soon experiences a painful feeling throughout his entire body. He kneels on the ground in pain as the troops rushed over to his side. They tell him not to force himself as using one enchant spell was already the limit for most people, and that under normal circumstances it would not be unusual for Art to be mentally broken down. Commander Marcos sees Art and takes a step forward. He then introduces himself to Art as the Commander Marcos of the Royal Knight. He praises Art for what he did just now and tells him that it was some impressive spell casting. The troops behind Commander Marcos were shocked to hear him praise Art, as Commander Marcos was someone who had rarely called people by their names and never really praised anyone. The troops then asked Pettis who Art was and he simply replied to them that he was a genius. Commander Marcos bends over to express his gratitude, causing to be flustered as he tells Marcos that it was no problem, but then Art spots something that catches his attention. Marcos was giving him a serious expression. Seeing this made Art bend over as well to once again introduce himself as Art, who was under the care of Marquis Isfiel. The two of them soon exchanged a brief look at one another. Tet interrupts them in a hurry as he calls out to Art. He tells him that they needed to head over to the nearby orphanage quickly, as Princess Urk was over there. The scene changes to the orphanage where black wolf monsters soon appear and Urk could be seen facing off against them, clad in her armor and wielding her mighty sword. Urk holds tightly onto her blade in order to wield her sword to protect those dear to her. The black wolf monster lunges at her but she manages to block its attack. One by one the black wolves began to attack her, but each time they did, Urk was able to defend against their attacks as they slowly surround her. She curses in her mind about the fact that she could not mess up while protecting the nuns and the children. She then thinks of Art's smiling face, and prepares to fight with all her might as she knew that she shouldn't be lenient as Art was risking his life to fight in the city. Urk had always worked hard to become a pillar of strength for Art. She grips her sword tightly wanting to protect them. Even if she was alone, she lets out a powerful downward swing of her sword that cuts down the black wolf that was closest to her. She then takes a heavy step into the ground and floats in midair to prepare another devastating sword attack at the two black wolves. Her attack lands with a powerful explosion seen from above, causing smoke and dust to scatter all around. Urk is seen in the smoke and dust holding her sword high up but is panting heavily from the exhaustion of using so many moves. She then swings her sword backward as she senses something behind her. But it turns out to be a simple rock. When suddenly two black wolves appeared from behind Urk's sides, she could not react in time as the black wolves' fangs slowly inched closer to her face. Blood was splattered in the air as Urk closed her eyes to hide from the potential attacks. But when she opened her eyes to see what was going on, she discovered two blades had hit both black wolves at once and caused electricity to flow throughout their bodies, stopping their attacks from ever reaching Urk and saving her life in the process. A shiny polished black shoe soon appeared in the smoke and dust as well. Art had finally arrived and managed to save Urk in time from the black wolves' attacks. They both showed a stunned and worried expressions on their faces. Art then says thank goodness you're all right to Urk. But her expression was darkened over the fact that she was once again saved by Art. The two had finally met after a long time, but Urk decides to apologize to Art for not being strong enough. Art tells her that it was not true and what's more important was the fact that she was injured and needed first aid. Urk tells him quietly that her injury was nothing and that she was okay. Tet finally reaches them and calls out to Urk while being relieved to see that she was safe. Both Urk and Art soon rushed back to the guild in the city as Tet informs them that there was an emergency meeting at the guild. They continued to run by the destroyed buildings and shops after the monsters had invaded. They soon reached the guild building, but Art notices that there were injured royal knights everywhere. A pair of royal knights push past Art saying to excuse them and to let them through. Art could clearly see how injured the royal knights were as they were covered in bandages filled with blood. He overhears the bandaged royal knight apologizing to his vice captain, who tells him to not talk anymore. Art grips his hand hard, thinking deeply. He then hands over a bottle to the injured pair of royal knights, who asked Art about what it was. He tells them that it was a salve and that he thought it might help them. The royal knights then asked who Art was, but he assures them that he was just an ordinary butler and to excuse him and Urk as they were in a hurry themselves. Back in the guild auditorium, a bunch of the guild members had gathered in huge numbers in front of Pettis. Pettis starts off the meeting by thanking the guild members for their good work with the monsters out in the city, and that he wanted them to listen to Art, who was beside him. Art thanks Pettis for the brief introduction and introduces himself to the guild members. He tells the others that he had conducted his own investigation and that he had noticed that the Black Locust's invasion rate was faster than anticipated. Art then tells them that he expects it will take the Black Locusts 3 days to reach their city of Firen. The guild members soon started to panic and rushed over to Art upon hearing that the Black Locusts would arrive in 3 days. They commented that it was bullshit, as the kingdom does not have enough soldiers and without a plan they would be like sitting ducks. Pettis hears the commotion and remains silent as the guild members shouted out their worries. He soon smashes the wall that was right behind both him and Art in pieces. The guild members were stunned by his actions as he looks at them in a serious manner. He reminded them that they had an urgent situation right now and needed them to shut up and listen to Art. Art was in awe of Pettis' Gigachad aura as he stares in wonder at him. Art then went on to explain his reasoning. He stated that previously the Black Locusts were approaching fast, which was where his magic-infused lemon water comes into play. He needed them to spray a layer of it on the front lines to keep the insects at bay. After hearing the explanation from Art, the guild members wondered if it would work, as they still couldn't subjugate the Black Locusts. Hearing the worries of the guild members allowed Art to reassure them that he had come up with a countermeasure. He reveals a black locust and a magic ore on the table and tells the guild members to observe. He explains to them that in an experiment, he had discovered that a black locust ingesting minerals brings about an effect on its shell. He then poses a question to the guild members, asking them what they thought of when a black locust is given a magic ore filled with magic to eat. Art looks with a sad expression in his eyes as the black locust flips on its back, with its legs moving rapidly but slowly comes to a stop. Urk was shocked to see this, as Pettis adds on that the black locusts did not have the right organs to digest mana and thus are intolerant of it. In other words, magic ores were poison to them. Art confirms that what Pettis said was true and states that they could maximize their chances of avoiding battle as well as exterminate a large portion of black locusts by using magic ores. But the guild members remained silent as they hear the explanations, causing Art to panic as he thought about if it wasn't good enough for them. The guild members soon rushed over to Art and praised him for the amazing idea that he had come up with, even going so far as to state that it was possibly the greatest achievement in the history of their kingdom. But Art tells them that it was also thanks to Princess Leah and Lady Urk, as without them it would not have been possible for the idea to exist. Urk became flustered upon hearing that Art was praising her and could just blush heavily and shyly. Pettis then informs the guild members that the decisive battle against the Black Locusts would be in 3 days and that they should prepare well beforehand. The guild members rejoiced in unison upon hearing those orders. Art looks over to Urk and starts to think about her. Recalling her face and knowing that she had given him enough strength by just being by his side. Art's face was once again filled with determination to protect all those that he held dear to his heart. As the swarm of black locusts is seen swarming over to the city of Firen, Art swears that no matter what happens, he would definitely protect Urk. Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.